Well, thank you for that plug of our book, the RSS. It will soon be available. It's been published by Hearst in London. It's already been published by Penguin in India. So I understand that, within the next 2 or 3 weeks it should be available, both that and in Kindle. I'd like to introduce my co-author who's here in the audience. Mr. Domley, you want to stand? I'll just say something about the writing of the book. We had hours, as our two wives will tell you, in which we argued back and forth in good Indian fashion. The Indians are known, according to a well-known author, as argumentative, and we certainly were argumentative in doing this book. We in RSS fashion, if we couldn't come to a conclusion, we'd put it on the side and come back to it. And even then, there weren't all the issues we could agree on. But we did reach a kind of consensus on most of them. The book is done actually quite well, and I hope it continues to do so, and thank you for giving a plug for the book. I'm pleased to introduce Dattatreya Hosabale, who is the Joint General Secretary of the RSS. I have met him several times. I've always been impressed by my conversations with him. He's clear and he's analytical, and there's a reason why in many ways he has become the public face of the RSS on policy issues. And I think you'll see why when you hear him give his address. We've had 2 seminars with him already today, one in the morning at my house, which was a kind of working brunch with several people, and with the focus was on foreign policy, and then one earlier at SAIS with some economists there on economic issues, and now we have his talk here today. As Mr. Khanderao mentioned, the RSS is the largest and probably most influential NGO in India today. It has affiliated units penetrating almost every part of India, and in our book we argue that it's actually the development of these affiliates that in some ways is the major development of the RSS family since we wrote the book, the last book, The Brotherhood in Saffron, almost 3 decades ago. And I don't think one will really understand what's happening to the RSS unless you look at what its various affiliated organizations are doing. There are 44 affiliated organizations now. That number is increasing. In fact, in our first draft of the book, I think is included in the book, we said 36, but since the book was, we closed the book on the book, another 8 have joined. There's at least 60 or 70 more that are in the queue, and you'll see what it takes to become a full-time affiliate if you look at the book. One of the affiliates, as Mr. Khanderao mentioned, is India's ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and the Prime Minister was once a full-time worker in the RSS, which I'm sure most of you know. Another prominent affiliate is the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, which is India's largest student group. And I mention that specifically because Mr. Hosabale was a student activist in the Vidyarthi Parishad, and in that joins a long list of prominent people both in the RSS and in the various affiliates, including most prominently the Bharatiya Janata Party, who had gotten their introduction in politics through the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad. In fact, if you look at a list of the cabinet members, a large percentage of the cabinet members also had their foundation and training in politics in the Vidyarthi Parishad. And for those of you who went to school in India, and I'm sure many of you have, you know that Indian student politics is very political. One only has to go to JNU, which I did recently, which just went through an election, and you see it all over the buildings. There are signs about one party or the other. And developing the art of political rhetoric is something that's important in student politics, and apparently it's something Mr. Hosabale learned when he was a student activist. He then later went on to be the National Organizing Secretary of the Vidyarthi Parishad for almost 15 years. And during the time that he led the organization, it had some of its fastest growth rates and was perhaps most innovative in programs that it put on. He has an MA, as was mentioned, in English literature, and he speaks 5 languages, which is not uncommon among senior RSS people to speak many languages, and there's a reason for that, is because they're expected to travel all over the country. And when they go to a particular region, they are expected to speak, or to be able to speak, in the language of the place that they go to, and that is continuing to this day. I know beside his mother tongue, which is Kannada, he speaks Hindi, Tamil, English, and Sanskrit. He has promised to speak English with us today, but I'm told that he is also fluent in Sanskrit, which always impressed me. When I was at the University of Chicago, I took a year of Sanskrit with Hans van Buitenen, which some of you may know, one of the leading Dutch scholars on Sanskrit, and it was one of the hardest things I had ever done, and I didn't go beyond a year, and I probably only know the most elementary grammar of Sanskrit, but he speaks it fluently. Near the beginning of his career, Mr. Hosabale, following the activist orientation of what was then a new Sarsang Chalak, that's Madhukar Deoras, he participated in the underground pro-democracy movement in India against the 1975-77 state of emergency, and he spent much of his time during that period in prison. Acknowledging his intellectual skills and his obvious organizing potential, the RSS elevated him to the position of Joint General Secretary after having served a period as head of the intellectual unit of the RSS. It's therefore not surprising that he has become a public face of RSS policy, and for that reason I think we all have a rare opportunity to hear what he has to say about a very important issue, on which I will say a few things. I'm not going to say much, because you didn't come here to hear me speak. You came here to hear Mr. Hosabale speak. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Kandarao Kant, who on behalf of the Foundation for India and Indian Diaspora Studies organized this event, which is one of several that this organization has done. Mr. Hosabale's talk this afternoon is the role of culture and nation in a globalized world. This is a major political issue, especially in democracies, and it is an issue in the US. As our two countries both approach elections which will help shape the politics of those two countries, these are critical issues that are part of the political debate in both countries. I think there are 2 issues that have stood out now in the Indian context. I won't talk about the American context, but somebody may want to make the comparison in the questions and answers, that have tended to shape India's view on politics and its role in the world. One is the image of itself as a great civilization, is the first. And the second is strategic autonomy as to how it reacts to the world independently. I think both of these have worked as an integrating force in India, as well as an incentive to play a role in the world. The Cold War and India's anemic economic growth rates in the some 2 or 3 decades after independence tended to mask the impact of these issues. But in the 1990s, you had a huge change that affected both of them, economic reforms in India and the end of the Cold War. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Hosabale to talk about how culture and nation and globalization have affected India and his view on this.
Thank you, Dr. Walter Anderson. Thank you, my friend Kandirao. respected Chairman, distinguished invitees, sisters and brothers, namaste to one and all. It's indeed a pleasure to be in the midst of all of you, and it has been a very memorable day for me, because since morning I've been interacting and moving with Professor Anderson and some of his esteemed friends and colleagues. As he has just now mentioned, we attended 2 very important meetings, and both of them have been very enlightening experiences for me. Now we are on the Capitol Hill. Shekhar Tiwari ji is here, and a couple of years ago, I was to participate in a program, and suddenly there was a shutdown of the government. I landed in US, and on that day the government shutdown was there and the program was cancelled. But Shekharji and Narsimji were kind enough. They didn't cancel the lunch, and we had the lunch. Today is 9/11. And this date has 2 distinct messages, both delivered from this land of destiny, that is United States. One in 1893, when Swami Vivekananda delivered his historic address at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. We are celebrating 125th year of that great event. The other was in 2001, which we all very well remember. 9/11 became famous because of 2001 and not because of 1893. And it became famous for wrong reason. And 2 opposite messages were sent. And both the messages were for the entire humanity. One much before the globalized world, and one after immediately the wake of globalization. And the one message that was delivered 125 years ago was a message for tolerance and universal acceptance. The other one was the very thing which Swami Vivekananda opposed and warned, cautioned, of religious bigotry and violence and bloodshed, intolerance, and anti-human attitude. So we know the significance of both. I need not underline them again for this audience. I am happy to see some of the members among the audience who are well known to me for quite a number of years. So today I have been asked to make a presentation on the role of culture and nation in a globalized world, an Indian perspective. topic has many key words which have to be defined from an Indian perspective. Each word is a topic in itself. But the present topic is a rainbow of ideas, and that is the way it should be approached, I feel. The pursuit of deep ideas dealing with the purpose of life has always excited the Indian mind, the Hindu mind. Ideas like mind over matter, soul over body, is the usual order of preference in India. It is the power to see the essential unity despite the apparent differences and diversities. So with this hypothesis that we evaluate the topic under the discussion for this evening. A survey and review of the famous texts in modern, particularly the Western social science, shows three things. First, culture and nation are linked. Second, the linkage is territoriality. And third, this territoriality is pegged on a degree of cultural uniformity, the core of which is race and religion. This is how the modern social sciences, which are generally taught in our universities, have been teaching us, have been informing us. It is bounded, exclusive, endowed with notions of superiority, hegemony, and the bureaucratic structure of administration, termed as the nation state, enacts that superiority. This has largely been the Western experience which manifested itself in colonialism for nearly 2 centuries or a little more. The 2 world wars in the last century and its total war concept of bloodletting, persecution, and territorial grab, which we generally say expansionism and imperialism. It's a history of social conflicts, civil wars, and political disputes. Therefore, the Western world becomes very uneasy with these concepts. Nationalism, culture, these things are not very welcome in the Western academic and intellectual arena. Post-war scholarship, therefore, likened the nation with the autarky, and culture was prefixed with multiculturalism. And the coinage in currency has been that is multiculturalism. A new economic order anchored by this nation, particularly USA, through IMF and World Bank in 1945, subsequent formation of the European Coal and Steel Community and EEC would establish the primacy of economy and all would be well, or so it was thought. The economic well-being is the supreme thing. Once the economic needs and aspirations are addressed, are taken care of, the humankind will be happy forever. So this has been the thought that has spread across the world for some decades. But certain developments burst forth. Oil shocks, Cold War, financial swings, again brought back culture and nation to the table. In the communist world, all cultural differences were ground down under the centralized control of Soviet Union. In Mao's China, the communist revolution was called Cultural Revolution. And what happened in Cultural Revolution is a history that cannot be forgotten. It was suppression, bloodshed, and political hegemony. Chafing under this control, there were repeated bursts of the nation in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and East Germany. Actually, Marxist theory of alienation, that is, the isolating and dehumanizing effects of working, was seen in the socialist world. After the fall of communism in 1990s, nation wars, religious, ethnic, and in nature, with the territorial demands, redrew the map of Balkans. Homogenization drives, casting what is dissimilar and different as the devil, dominance, persecution, racial superiority, and consequent splintering of societies and countries have been the major components of culture, nation, and relations between nations. This has been the Western experience since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, after the 30-year-long war or the 80-year-long war between Spain and Dutch. We can have peace through peace treaties. This is characteristic of Western social, cultural, and political thinking. Westphalia was a series of peace treaties whose surmise was that peace would be maintained through balance of power. Balance of power was extremely crucial, for it would reign in a nation's ambition for territorial grab and therefore would secure peace. Peace and cooperation among the community of nation states or regional and quasi-global interconnectedness was thus the outcome of a military strategy. And this is the only cultural prism which the West knows, what is known as the rational choice tradition in political science. In this worldview, because of the various historical experiences, culture and nation are suspects. They are overlaid with multiculturalism, pluralism, etc., or the borderless world. However, the approach has intrinsic flaws because external add-ons cannot recoup inherent deficiencies. They can provide relief for some time, but a lasting resolution is difficult. This is where the Indian perspective on culture, nation, and a globalized world becomes important or even necessary. That's what I feel, and that is my submission. Social theories emanate from social experiences and history of human conduct. Ever since man acquired language to give expression to ideas, the Indian perspective of the Hindu perspective on culture, nation, and globalized world have been two aphorisms, which are very beautifully expressed in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. The other aphorism, which is uttered often and now is a part of popular culture, is Om Shanti. Let there be peace. So peace is inherent and the sole objective of all activities. Hostility has to be kept away from all environments. Yes, even in learning environments, debates, discussions, modern forms of technology transfer, etc. That's why the prayer in the Upanishad that Hindus have been making for thousands of years is Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahe, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May God protect us both, the teacher and the taught, during the journey of knowledge awakening. May God nourish us both. May we work together with energy and vigor. May our study be enlightening and not giving rise to hostility. May it not be limited by constricting or limiting our understanding to a particular manifestation only. So these are the eternal words that point to the universal acceptance, accommodateness, pluralism, and respecting all varieties of thought, action, practice, culture, and civilizational differences. These are the universal values that emanate from these eternal words. So now let us proceed one by one to the three important aspects of culture, nation, and globalized world. The Indian experience is that culture is rooted not in the notions of race or religion. Class methods of worship, or forms of dress or manners, or some expressions of song and music. But they are rooted in shared values. All these things which I mentioned, they are the expressions of those values. What is culture? Culture is the expression of the soul of a nation, of a people. It is the expression of the soul. In the context of India, India's soul is its spirituality. And because of that spiritual view, the divinity that is present in everything, living and non-living, which has been beautifully explained in Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. This basic spiritual attitude and views, this spiritual value, that gets expressed through various activities, practices, traditions, manifestations, which are cultural expressions. That is culture. That's why we say song, music, or various other such activities of human beings. So for any nation, the culture of a nation is the expression of the core, the soul, the spirit of the people collectively. These values are eternal or Sanatan. They have withstood the ravages of time, change of ruling dynasties and forms of government. The governments could not trample them. The kings, however powerful they may be, or the foreign subjugation has also not been able to change the core cultural values. The political ideologies or philosophies, they cannot change these things. The Hindu mind sees the underlying unity and treats differences as only apparent variations. Therefore, there are many sampradayas, sects, languages, food habits, dress styles, etc. This is not a cause of duress for us or a management task. This is a celebration of life. Ekoham bahusyama. It is said that the Creator felt that I am alone, I am one. I would like to manifest in many. I am one, let me be many. Eko aham bahusyama. We are in United States. I would like to give the example of the famous word in the Americans say, e pluribus unum, which is there on every American coin, which appears. Out of many, one. So out of many, you'd like to see that one, and one has it got manifested into many. So the quest for one among many was investigated thousands of years ago in India, because the human being wants to achieve that, how to find this oneness among the many. The cultural understanding was ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, and the wise call it by different names. So there were no homogenization drives in India, never have been in 5,000 years of known history. This is the core feature of Indian culture. Almost as a mathematical axiom, we accept all as equally true. I am underlining these thoughts and words because in the globalized world, these are the essential things that are being challenged, that are being destroyed. Second, Indian culture and nation were preserved by scholar saints like Shankara, Ramanuja, and Vivekananda, mystics, poets, educationists, great kings like Ashoka and Shivaji, political leaders of saintly disposition like Mahatma Gandhi and Aurobindo. It was preserved in texts and motifs that taught moderation of strength and dharma. Strength with dharma. To understand this, one needs to understand the national emblem of India, the Saranath lions and Ashok Chakra. The 4 lions representing power, courage, confidence, and pride are centered on the Dharma Chakra, which in English may be called the wheel or circle of righteousness. Dharma Chakra or Dharma cannot be totally and satisfactorily translated into other languages. I would not like to go into that aspect. This knowledge of Dharma and peace is not some joyless stoical quest for investigation, but it's ananda or bliss. This is Indian culture's priceless inheritance, and this is what we are sharing with the world. As Swami Vivekananda declared, Vayam Amritasya Putraha, we are all children of immortal bliss. India's Dharma Chakra has been intact even in the face of prolonged suffering. People today see the depredations of Islamist onslaughts and shudder. In the medieval times, India suffered ISIS to the power of 10. Grand temples were desecrated and located by Islamic invaders. Vast areas were depopulated. For 600 years, from the 11th century to 16th century, the jizya tax was imposed on the majority population. It was abolished by Akbar but reintroduced by Aurangzeb in the 17th century. This harsh contact did not embitter the spirit of Indian culture, and it retained its Hinduness in content and orientation. I am saying this because, in spite of these depredations, continuous struggle for survival of the Rashtra Dharma and of cultural values and the practices and traditions, the bitterness has not become there have been holocausts of multiple times. But the Indian approach to the world on the basis of its cultural values has always advocated the universal peace and universal acceptance and mutual respect of any path of or mode of worship of the God or the Almighty. Nation, the second key word in the topic is in the modern times, nation and nation state are almost same. Nation is understood only in the background of nation state as nation state, because nation has a territorial geographical border. United Nations organizations, UNO, is essentially United Nations state organizations. Let us say Indonesia is considered to be a nation and it becomes a member country of UNO. And East Timor becomes separated, it gets separated from Indonesia. And next day 10 countries recognize it. And within a year, United Nations also recognizes it and it becomes a member country. So there is one more nation is created. I always give one very interesting example. India was divided, partitioned in 1947 into 3 different states. So they call it 3 different nations. Then it was 2 different nations. East Pakistan and West Pakistan, together one, and India, the remaining part. So whether they are 3 nations or 3 nation states and 1 nation. And such examples can be there for other countries also. I'll come to the division of Germany into East and West Germany in 1944, and then the unification in 1989, whether there were 2 nations from 1944 to 89, or it was 1 nation and 2 nation states. How nation is to be understood? So I was giving the example of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. A person who takes a birth in the city of Dhaka in 1940. His nationality is India till 1947, August 15th. The person is still living in Dhaka, let us say. So from 1947 to 1971, his nationality becomes Pakistani. And in 1971, when the same piece of land becomes Bangladesh, then his nationality is changed to Bangladeshi. So in one life, his nationality has changed into 3 different nationalities. Whether the citizenship has changed or the nationality has changed. So nationality is a socio-cultural phenomenon, whereas a citizen is a politico-legal concept. So the nation, how a nation is to be explained, that's why even in the Western thinkers, like Renan, they have said that nation is a spiritual principle. Nation is a spiritual principle. It is not somebody Indian who has said. Indians have always felt it. But a Western thinker also saying this. So nation is the sum total of a land, people, and their cultural values. These 3 distinct aspects coming together become a nation. For a nation to come to existence, these 3 essential ingredients are required: the land, the people, and culture. But if there is no land, in the case of Israel, for nearly 1900 years, they didn't have a land. Jewish people, they were in different countries all over the world. But the Jewish nation, whether it was existing or not, it was existing in their minds. Jewish cultural values, they existed for so many generations. That is why the craving for homeland ultimately it got realized. So that's why the nation, as we know, hinges on shared historical tradition, major elements of common culture, inhabiting in a geographical space. In Western literature, a single communal identity is also focused upon. It is therefore no accident that communal identity is the basis of political formation, which was introduced by the British through the Morley-Minto reforms or the Indian Council Act of 1909, which provisioned separate electorates for Muslims to the imperial legislative councils and provincial legislative councils. In one land, the same people were considered to be 2 nations. Their cultural roots were not different. So the nation today in the globalized world, but particularly after the experience of the European nations, Hitler and others, the nationalism has become a bad word. That is not the experience of all the countries in the world. That may be the experience in Europe. That is not the experience in the Oriental part. That's why when somebody expresses the term nationalism, suddenly the memories of Europe, particularly of Germany and other countries, they come to our minds. So nation today, after the Brexit, So the importance or the relevance of nation is being experienced today. The national borders cannot be erased because of the globalization. Nations are important. Nations are important for the development of individuals, and nations are important for the development of the humanity as well. So the concept of nation is today in the globalized world, sometimes it is questioned, and sometimes it is felt that there is no importance of the borders. It may be true as far as economic activities are concerned. There may be a borderless world because of the globalization. Because globalization, as is commonly understood in our times, is a mammoth techno-commercial juggernaut propelled by information communication technology and the global integration of markets. It is about ever-increasing worldwide interconnectivity, interconnected in opportunities, and interconnected in challenges and problems. This is physical gross dimension. But there is another dimension, operating at the subtle level, at the level of consciousness, about which Indians have been talking about for a very long time. This consciousness has to be in the nature of an embedded software, because without this consciousness, globalization will become a steamroller of dominance, trampling local traditions and variations. Slowly, the West is waking up to this fact. Manfred B. Steger says, globalization refers to the expansion and intensification of social relations and consciousness across world time and world space. What is this consciousness has to be demonstrated not through tons of theories, but by daily living conduct. If this consciousness is based on the essential unity of mankind, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam principle of equality and fundamental unity, there will be convergence despite complexities of social, political, economic, and environmental factors. If this is not the case, then there will be hot contests, greed and rage. We have seen the impacts of this in the 20th century when global contexts devoid of consciousness, fueled only by material greed and desires, led to imperial rampage and subjugation of 2/3 of humanity. Never again such a thing should happen. Friends, I would like to come to the final part of my thoughts. When globalization was introduced in the field of economy and communication technology, the perception was, or the anticipation was, that the globalized world will diffuse the strength of culture and the relevance of nations. Contrary to this perception, the relevance of nations and the strength of culture are there to see and experience for all of us. While a certain degree of uniformity and homogenization has taken place, no doubt, as Mr. Samuel Huntington wrote in Foreign Affairs nearly 10-15 years ago, that the new colonization, he mentioned it as coco-colonization. So this uniformity or homogenization has taken place. Lifestyles, entertainment, food habits to a certain extent in the modern metropolitan cities, particularly across the world. While a certain degree of uniformity and homogenization has taken place, continues to take place, while a certain type of patterns of culture has predominated, the quest of societies and individuals for rediscovering the root and origins of their identity has also picked up. Across the world, people are trying to find their roots. People who are displaced from their places, living elsewhere, they are also trying to find their roots and cultural identities. The challenge of globalization is its propensity towards homogenization, bringing about an artificial unity through uniformity. But a movement for a civilization and cultural self-rediscovery or self-recovery is also underway across the world. For example, the pagan communities, pre-Christian communities across the world, they are trying to rediscover themselves. They are trying to see that their cultural values, traditions, and practices are retained. There is a movement going on. So that's why the danger that was cautioned because of the globalization is not true. Greater connectivity and exchange has also increased the awareness of the original culture and identity among many nations and people. The interconnectedness, the communication technology, these things have helped in creating a newfound awareness of the original culture. Dominant nations impose their cultural dimensions and expressions. This is cultural hegemony in globalization. While exchange of ideas and commodity, hybridization of both have gone for centuries, India's cultural footprints in Southeast Asia is an example where she did not enter through coercion, but through a process of osmosis and developed a sense of family. In the context of globalization today, dominant nations impose their cultural agendas through various channels. While this went through an unchallenged phase, such an imposition is no more unchallenged. That's why, as I mentioned, many communities across the world, they are now, because of the newfound awareness of the cultural originality and their roots, they are challenging these homogenization or cultural agendas and impositions. Colonization is also based on commercial and cultural hegemony. As I have just now put it, the fight for independence and decolonization has also been a struggle for a cultural self-recovery, a recovery of identity. Neocolonization and new imperialism are essentially based on cultural hegemony and exploitation of local resources. Now, as far as Indian perspective to this is concerned, India's approach through her culture and soft power has attracted interest since it is an approach which is gradual and soft, respecting local traditions, way of life, and its various expressions. Live and let live. As I said in the beginning, the words of Vivekananda, tolerance, universal acceptance, and mutual respect. Every cultural component of every community and people, they are important. They are not only the signs of diversity, but they are the expressions of the God Almighty and His creation. That's why their importance, their significance, their relevance for the humankind's existence is of utmost importance. This is what makes India different from, say, China. India does not interfere with social structures, does not create imbalance or generate unrest in countries where she has penetrated through cultural and development outreach. This approach stems from her civilizational wisdom and experience. In a globalizing world, this is a very crucial approach for creating a large network and universal acceptability. I would like to quote in this context Joseph Nye from his book Soft Power, The Means to Success in World Politics. He says, I quote, "The soft power of a country rests primarily on three resources: its culture, where it is attractive to others; second, its political values, where it lives up to them at home and abroad; and third, its foreign policies, when they are seen as legitimate and having moral authority. Culture is a set of values and practices that create meaning for a society. It has many manifestations. It is common to distinguish between high culture, such as literature, art, and education, which appeal to the elites, and popular culture, which focuses on mass entertainment." Now, a very important sentence of Joseph Nye is, I quote, "When a country's culture includes universal values and its policies promote values and interests that others share, it increases the probability of obtaining its desired outcomes because of the relationships of attraction and duty that it creates." This should be the agenda of a culture. It is not homogenization in the name of globalization, but universalization in the name of, in the value of human dignity and diversities. So that's why the beautiful thing I would like to quote from Swami Ranganathananda, who was the president of Swami Ramakrishna Mission. Some of the modern scientists echo and eulogize such thoughts that the globalization the pure consciousness, as the Hindu spiritual messages have time and again they have declared that they are indivisible, because the globalization wants to homogenize, create a uniformity for achieving unity. But achieving unity while respecting and retaining diversity and plurality is possible because you experience, you feel that there is one pure consciousness that permeates all. As I said in the beginning itself, that the Indian approach is that the same divinity is present everywhere, that pure consciousness, irrespective of the cultural, civilizational differences of the humankind. It exists everywhere. Swami Ranganathananda gives a beautiful example. Consciousness is always singular, it is never plural. It appears in different people, but it is one, just like space, which is indivisible. By constructing buildings and walls, one does not divide the space at all. Space is space. Just because you have erected walls, space is not divided. The consciousness is same. Because you are having state, nation, or human body, you have not divided the consciousness. That is why it is singular always and it is not plural. We conceived this idea and realized this truth in India many years ago. The Atman is infinite, indivisible, one in all. That concept must inspire the modern effort towards globalization. This is what Swami Ranganathananda says. Then it will become an accomplished fact. Globalization will bring international peace, international cooperation, international understanding. Without that, the present-day concept, merely at the technological and economical level, will lead to the exploitation of the weak by the strong, creating uniformity without achieving unity. This should not happen. Why not fill up the situation today with something basic, something profound, something inspiring? That is what India contributes to the concept of globalization through her Vedanta. So this is what I wanted to present before you, that culture and nation and their relevance, even in a globalized world, are more, and they are getting more and more important. And for a real globalization to take place, this universal consciousness, tolerance, respect, and acceptance on the basis of strong human cultural values, if these things are underlined